Good morning, everyone. Just setting up something. Just give me 1 sec. Okay. The guides next door extra loud today, so I'm trying to play some music in a separate tab and get that playing without showing on screen, which seems to be working. What's going on, Rodney? Yeah, it's been ages, huh? Let me know if you can hear some like low chill hip hop background noise. Trying to drown out the guys next door. All right. All right. So what I'm going to do here, kind of a quick tutorial. I did a quick Spider-Man portrait sketch while listening to Rodney's stream, which was on, just ended like 15 minutes ago. So did that quick pencil sketch, scanned it, printed 3 times. You can hear the beat, but you can't hear the. Okay. I don't know. I tried. Anyways, so then I printed it out on a piece of paper and carbon transferred it onto a piece of watercolor paper. So the purpose of this tutorial, and hopefully my mic audio isn't too muffled. The purpose of the tutorial just show kind of 3 different ways to approach coloring with water-based media, namely watercolor. So before I can go in super heavy with the paint, I just want to make sure I block in all my edges, and it's a very faint pencil lines just so I can see my shapes. I'm just going to put a piece of paper here. All right, that sounds good. What's up, Kevin? Hola. So one thing to keep in mind if working with watercolors is the paper you use is very important. You don't need to use anything super fancy or expensive. This is I believe Strathmore 300. It's a blue cover. You can buy this at Walmart. It's like $6. It's got some tooth to it. It's got some thickness. It's a nice thick cardstock. I use it a lot for acrylic, or it's technically meant for watercolor, but yeah. So the first thing is the paper, and the second part is when you're drawing, you have to have a very light hand because you don't want to create creases in the paper because they will stand out in the colors. Really should have done this before I went live because it's kind of hard to draw at an angle on my board here. But oh, this is meant to be about the colors, not about the lines. What do you use on your MM18 cards? I'm gonna say some were watercolor and some were very soft acrylic washes. Honestly, I can't remember. I didn't really document much of that process. I'm gonna say most of them probably watercolor. Yeah, Kevin, it's most likely watercolor, but when I first started dabbling with acrylics, I was using them like watercolors. So they're gonna have that look, even though it's acrylic paint. So let's just say watercolor. It's yeah, probably watercolors. So I think I might be a little off frame here. Um, I'm just making the webbing more defined. Just don't want to lose those lines when I apply color. Okay, so that's one. Let's do this guy. We'll just call this the warm-up phase. I generally don't like Spider-Man, drawing Spider-Man because of the webbing. Now, when you do a portrait, it's different because it's actually pretty simple, and the face webbing isn't very complicated. But to do a full figure and get the webbing to follow the contours of the muscles and so on, it's a pain in the ass. So I try to avoid it. I'd much rather do a black suit Spider-Man. But the reason I'm using him for this exercise is that primarily one color, right? Spider-Man's red. So if anyone wants to follow along, or try to do, you only really need one. Well, actually, you're going to see it's more than one color, but you don't need to mix and try to get an exact hue. Okay, the last head. It's the three-headed dog called, the one that guards hell in Greek mythology. Cerberus. I'm a little sniffly. Let's try to keep it on frame. Set the camera really close to the board so you can see the detail, but as I flip my paper to do the lines, it's going to go a little bit off frame, but we'll be almost done with that. We'll be done with that in a minute. Then it should say pretty much on frame the whole time, hopefully. Time is at 12:20. I'll be on for a couple hours, so I'm not rushing. All right, 3 Spider-Mans. All right, so if you look at the original pencil sketch, the way I was shading it, and I didn't transfer the shapes of the shading, he's pretty much lit that on, meaning that the light's coming right to the front of his face, so the shadows are going to contour his face, and it's going to cast a shadow on his neck, which I blocked in, as you can see there. So these are really going to be the dark areas. I didn't really transfer those because I don't want to block in the shadows and shape. I'm going to create the shadows in color. So the first approach, I'm just going to set this off to the side so I can look at it constantly. The first approach is going to be kind of soft color version. We'll do it on this one. And I'm using cheap watercolors. I have expensive watercolors as well, but for the purpose of this exercise, I'm going to use cheap watercolors to make it accessible. and I'm using a set of Pelican watercolors. I've had this thing since probably 97, which was, I think, the last time I went to Germany. It was like the equivalent of $6. Um, Nothing special, but they're decent, consistent color. So I should prepare that. Very important when working with watercolors to use clean water. So I have a little container here with clean water. And I need Kleenex or paper towel to absorb stuff. Okay, so not as prepared as I should be, but nonetheless, okay, all I really need for this one is, I don't know what the colors are labeled, but there's 2 reds, an orange, and some blues. So I'm going to use the reds, the blues, and maybe the orange. Doesn't matter which hue or which tone. But first things first, I want to wet the paper. And when using watercolors, you definitely want to wet the paper before you start applying colors. And 2 reasons for it. One, it'll help seal in the pencils a little bit. So just with pure water, I'm just going to wet it. And this is a number 6 flat. Doesn't really matter. Actually, the bigger brush you use, the better. And let that dry a little bit. I don't want it too wet because it's going to drip. So I'm going to use that brush. And I'm going to use a number 5 round, which is a little abused, but that's fine. And see what else I have here that I can use for watercolors. Most of my brushes are abused for acrylic. Maybe a number 1 round for detail. And it's always good to have a piece of paper off on the side where you can test your colors. So that's what I have here. It's going to be off frame, but that's okay. I'm just going to dab some of this. So I'm primarily going to be focused on the red here. And with watercolor, you want to work light to dark, meaning you're just going to build layers of color and gradually darken them. That's the, call it, traditional way of using watercolor. And I don't use watercolor much because I don't have the patience for it, and I like really vivid colors now. So I'm not too, like, this is not scripture by any means. It's just kind of one way to do it. So this one's going to be kind of more the traditional watercolor format. The next one I'm going to do dark to light, which is more similar to the way I work with acrylic. All right, so I just have the brush loaded with red, and I'll start blocking in the reds. Now, it's important to have the paper wet because it will naturally blend. If you're working on dry paper, you're going to leave brush strokes behind, and unless you intentionally want that look, it's not great. Just want to get a nice even glaze or wash. These all red, so it makes it simpler, except the eyes. We'll do the eyes last. Because the surface is still wet, if you're not perfect, if you don't have perfect edging, you can still correct it. Very important to let the paint dry a bit before you do another coat, because otherwise you're going to start peeling it off. Luckily, I have my blow dryer here. And you know what I'm going to do? While this one dries, I'm going to do a base coat on this guy as well. This one I'm going to do in a different technique towards the end, but I don't want to work on white, so kind of two birds with one stone. And this one I didn't wet, so it's going to leave some strokes possibly, or it's not going to be as even, but for the purpose of what I'm going to do this one, it doesn't really matter. It's not going to be as clean either, which is fine. So I just want to flat wash. But you can see right away, because the paper wasn't wet, there's some variance in the intensity of the color, which if you want it, then it's fine. But if that's not the look you're going for, it's very important to wet the paper. There's a line there. You can work, I mean, you can wet the paper and kind of go over it and blend it out. It can be fixed. It's just such a simple step, just wetting the paper, that will simplify the process. Okay, so we'll let that dry, and as it dries, it'll be a little bit more obvious that the texture is not great. But I see this one is very nice and flat, very soft too. Now, as you wet the paper is going to start buckling a bit, and that's fine. That's the way it behaves. So I tape it down. It keeps it a little bit stronger, but it's always going to buckle. So that's pretty dry. So that is going to be pretty much my base coat. That's the lightest anything's going to get. So I'm using the same red, a little bit more red in the mix, so it's not as washed down or washed out. And now I'm going to use two brushes. So I'm going to keep on using my flat, and this one's going to be pretty much just wet. And I'm going to bring in my large round, or another flat, really, just another brush. So you have one with color, one with water. Make sure that you have that this brush is nice and wet. So just loading up a lot of paint in my round brush. I'm going to start shapy, darker colors. So I'll do a shape, and then with the wet brush, soften the edges. Only soften the edges if you need them soft. Right, going towards the center of the face. Should I don't want any hard edges at this point. This area is going to be darker. Cast shadow from his chin. I'm used to working with acrylics, so I use my finger, but you can't do that with watercolors. See, while it's moist, you can easily blend edges. Apply some color, and then with a wet brush, soften the edges. You have to work a little bit quick because you don't want to let the paint dry where you don't want a hard edge. Here I want to leave a little bit of an edge to give the sense of the cheekbone. So that's that little triangle there. If you get water pooling like it did in the corner there, just clean your brush and go dab it. It'll pick it right up as long as the surface is still wet. This should still be a little wet, so I can blend the edge. Paper is starting to dry a bit, so I might have to do. It's very humid. So, sorry, very dry, not very humid. Very dry inside because the AC is going crazy. So I think this is drying a little faster than I'd like it to. So a way to fight that instead of wetting the whole surface is to wet the edge. So now I'm going to darken this edge of his head, so his right head. So I'm going to go dark there, but I'm going to want it to blend into the center. So I'm going to just just put some water down so that's nice and wet. And now back with my red. You see, as soon as it's hitting the part where it's really soaked, it's going to start blending by itself. If you don't want it to blend so much, clean the brush and just feather it out. That's actually a watered bead right there that I didn't see. Don't want that. So far I've been using the same color. It's the exact same red. It's kind of like my mid red in this set. I'm gonna introduce a darker red and then a blue um, to start darkening things a bit. And for the webbing as well. I don't think I'm going to throw any black in here. Actually, let me deal with the darkest areas first. Actually, I'm going to darken his entire left side. Now, if the paper's too wet, which is what's happening here, you can start seeing a little bit of a texture building out. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm starting to break the surface of the paper. So that means I need to let it dry before I start scrubbing more paint on it. So I'm going to pull out the blow dryer in a second and force the whole thing to dry. But first, I'm going to darken this whole side a little more. I'm not going to touch the neck part at all because I'm going to hurt the paper there. So anyone that's watching, if you have any questions, if you're watching it live or on a replay later, just drop them in the comments. I'll try to answer the best I can, or the best of my abilities. Sure don't get a edge on the inside there. I do want this to blend. Whenever you start seeing dots in your surface, it means it's too wet and you're scraping the paper. So I'm just going to mute myself for a second and pull out the blow dryer. That should be nice and soft. I'll give it another minute to dry. But in the meantime, while that's fully drying, I'm going to block in a little bit of color in the eyes because it's not going to be flat white. And what I'm doing here is just a hint of black mixed with a bit of blue. And it's just going to give me a very, I'm going to grab a piece of paper so I can show you what that's going to look like a very, that's too dark or too saturated, which means that I need more water. There, that's perfect. Just add a bit of shape. I'll leave a highlight on the side there. Yeah, what's up, JD? Gotta be very soft with the Spidey. With a little bit more color on my brush. So less water, more color. And do a shadow basically being cast from the mask onto the lens. It just creates a little bit of dimension. We're going to do the same thing towards the end, underneath the mask, underneath the eye cover thingies. It'll cast a shadow on the mask itself. All right, so now that this is pretty dry by the looks of it, I definitely need to darken the shadow here and more on the side of the face. So before I throw in another color, I'm going to mix in a darker red, which looks like this. It's kind of like a Merlot. It's got a blue tint to it, kind of going to the purples, which is great. And just a comparison, that's what the original red looks like unsaturated, not watered down. So I'm going to throw in some of this into my red. That's going to give me a softer, cooler shadow. Again, have one brush wet, so just with water. Actually, I'm just going to wet this a little bit so I can get a smoother blend. So just adding some water there. And I'm going to hit it with the darker red. Come in with the wet brush and just blend out the edges a bit. Okay, do the same thing on the head. Wet the brush, just softly blend it in. I'm leaving that hard edge there to give the sense of a cheekbone underneath the mask. Same way as I left a little bit of a highlight here. Just mirrors. I think the bottom's drying out a bit, so I can go a little darker. Really, the darkest part from a value standpoint is going to be under his chin here. Obviously, the mask goggle cover thing is going to be very dark, but that's a local color, not a value. Uh, my paper keeps on shifting. Okay, just gonna blow dry it a bit. It's stuck. All right, so now to darken it, I'm gonna throw some blue in my mix and really basically go purple for the shadows. probably not going to use black at all, um, not even in the mask. So my darker value now is going to be like this. Actually, very similar to the Merlot, so I need to go darker. Just going to throw in more blue, more red. Yeah, I like that. So I'm just going to flip this upside down because it's easier for me to do curves going towards the body. So don't be afraid to flip the canvas or the paper in whichever direction you're more comfortable, whichever direction gives you more control. So as that's drying, I'm going to throw in a little bit more blue. And really get into the purples now. So my purple now is like really purplish. Upside down. See, it's really starting to take form. And because he's lit from the center, just the lightest is going to be down the center and just darkens off to the sides. Okay. I just need to get this down here a little darker. It's looking a little messy too, because I just keep on. So let me blow dry it. Get back. Just go violet. There we go. Now we're getting nice and dark. And I can see that here it's too shiny. And the reason that's happening is just because I didn't neutralize that area enough when I did the original base red. So I'm just going to take my original red with some water and just go over that area a little bit more. So it'll just get rid of that pinkness. Just adding more value to it. Same thing here. That's too light. This edge is a little hard, so I'm just going to go with the original red that I was using. Just kind of repaint that a little bit. I'll leave a highlight there. I just want to neutralize those hot spots a little bit. Shift a little bit. So it's starting to come together. It's the white eyes are really throwing it off because obviously there's no color there and it just looks goofy. But you can see the form start building in on the rest of them. Yeah, I'm just graduating this blend a little bit because it's a little too dark at the edge. I just want it to blend in a little nicer. So just with a little bit of color and a lot of water, just lightly glazing. Don't press too hard with the brush because you're going to start scraping paint off, and that just not good. A touch more red. So I'm not really using reference for the lighting, so I'm picking a little bit out as I'm going along. The only thing that really kind of, for me, it's a nitpicking thing. I really like to have the jawline defined. So I'm just gonna make sure that it's got a nice hard edge around the jaw. Actually, while I'm doing these darker areas, I'm gonna do the shadow of the mask of the goggles on the mask. So this is pretty much the same purple I used in here, and I'm gonna try to do this with a number 5, just because this is a new brush and it's got a nice fine tip. Just going to draw a very fine line underneath the mask. So similar to what I did there, inside the mask to give a sense of depth. Just want to make it look like the mask is casting a shadow on, or his goggle thing is casting a shadow on the red mask. Let's do. Actually, he's lit this way, so it won't have a shadow there. We're going to add a highlight towards the end. But there could be a shadow on this side from the little horn thing, because Spider-Man is a little horny. It's because he's got horns, right? So much working on commissions. Whoop, man down. We'll be on for an hour, and I don't even have one Spider-Man head done yet. So I'll be back in 5 minutes. I'm just gonna go stretch my legs because I've been streaming for an hour, and I like to take a break every hour, stretch my legs for a minute, and also got to go to the washroom. So stick around. We'll continue Spider-Man when I'm back. Okay, I'm back. Hey, Tommy. All right, let's do the glasses, or whatever, the frame on his glasses. So I'm going to start off with just blue as a base. Do another coat, just gradually darken it. Let me hit that with the blow dry for a sec. Okay. Go back with some more blue, but now I'm going to start leaving some highlight areas. So I'm going to stop covering everything because he's being lit from the center. I want to leave a highlight lip there and at the tips of the horns. Same thing on this side. Now flip it. So I added a touch of black in my mix now to really start darkening this. It's kind of looking like a denim, which is fine. I'll change the music to something else. See if this is better. It's getting too wet, so as I add more brush strokes, it's starting to peel. So I'll let that dry and do the second lens. So I'm just gradually going darker and darker. So now this is in a black, which is blue mixed with the black. So it's definitely darker, but not pure black. Should let that side dry and take this side. See, and I'm not coloring the whole thing black. I am leaving some of the blue to show through. So I'm not darkening everything. I'm leaving some of the shape of the highlight in the original or the previous base color. Just darkening away from the light, so away from the center. Just create some dimension. Couple more frames, sorry about that. So I'm hoping the other two heads don't take as long. Trying to do more quicker techniques for those, less paint. Now, if any areas are too bright, same as I did with the red, I'm gonna go back with my original blue and just dab them so they're not as stark. Watercolor doesn't, there's no white in watercolor because you're supposed to use the white of the paper. But a lot of watercolor sets will come with white, and that's actually white gouache, which is an opaque cousin of watercolor. It's actually more similar to acrylic, but it is still water activated, so you can soften it. Gotta see if I have any white gouache to maybe do some highlights on this one. Or not. Haven't decided yet. All right, so now that I have this really dark area here, it's kind of going a lot of focus, I can see that some of my darker areas on in the red need a little pop. Well, not a little pop, they need to go a little darker just to keep that contrast. I'm just going to mix a little bit more of that purple that I used originally, and I'm just going to darken here a little bit. really starting to come together. Now, one trick to add dimension is same way I added purple to the darks to darken them. You can add a complementary color to your base to lighten it. So what I'm doing, I'm just going to mix a little bit of yellow, basically a very soft orange, just to get a yellow tint. Just so, like that. Very diluted with water. And add that yellow to the highlight. Actually, all the highlights. So there's a highlight here on the shoulder. Add a little bit to the eyes as well. It's got a nice form happening. Let's add a little bit here. Don't want to go crazy with it because you don't want to change the look of the entire piece. It'll just help blend because now it's blending from purple to red to a light red to a very light yellow. And I'll check in a minute if I have some gouache for to add some highlights. If not, maybe I'll do them with a jelly roller. But first, the most important part in Spider-Man and the part that's the most frustrating is the webbing. So for this, I'm going to switch to a number 1 round. And this is a fairly new brush. It still has a nice tip. And I'm going to mix blue, my darkest blue with a touch of black. Because I didn't use black anywhere. It should be like that, maybe darker. And actually this brush might not be fine enough to give me, oh, you know what, I think I can do it. This is the moment of truth. This is the trickiest part, and the easiest way to screw up your Spider-Man is to screw up the webbing. Always work in the direction that you're most comfortable in. In this case, for me, it's towards the body. Got a curve here. I do the other line. I think it's about here. Don't rush. This is the part where you have to be patient. And you can fix anything. It's just gonna take a while. So I made a mistake right there. I'll explain that in a second. A little trick about the webbing I figured out last time I did a Spider-Man. Okay, top webbing. This is very emotional. I messed up that point too. So I have this dark loaded on the brush. I'm just gonna basically key the edges a little better. Give me sharper edges. And then I'm gonna do I need to do the webbing on the neck, which I don't. Did I do it in the drawing? No, I didn't do it in the drawing. I always forget about that. We hope Rich isn't watching. Today I was actually going to work on this commission. This was only going to be a quick thing. So much for that idea. All right, so I didn't pencil in the webbing on the neck, so I'm going to kind of wing it. Hopefully it makes sense. Not sure if there's anyone still watching. If you are, thanks for the support. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being you. And don't forget to like, subscribe, share. That's for Billy. Also, don't forget to tip your waitress. All right, so let me see if I have some white gouache. No, I do actually have some Artist Loft, the cheap white gouache, but I'm not going to use it on this one. So that's the end of this variation of the 3 Spider-Man heads. All right, so moving on to the next one. So this one is hopefully going to be a faster approach. And what I'm going to do here, this is more of a sketchy version of it. And by that, I mean that I'm going to do all the values or most of the values in pencil and then just do a couple of glazes. So I have my pencil transfer, obviously. I'm just going to make the darken some of the lines and really start creating the values and the form, just some pencil shading. This should be faster. Say that very carefully because the first one should have been pretty quick too. Okay, easy webbing pencil, easy peasy. So it's great having this one side by side because I can basically just reproduce the shadows that I created there. I don't have to rethink it. So I'm just blocking in my core shadows, and I'm going to blend them or soften them in a second using makeup brushes. And this is just HB lead, 5 mil. The thing you need to be aware of in this approach is that if you're working on watercolor paper like I am, watercolor paper has a texture to it, so you're not really going to get a smooth application of the pencil. You can see the texture of the paper. You're going to be tempted to press harder, but you don't want to dent the paper. So don't do that. I need to grab a little sheet here to not smudge. So I'll get my hand out of the frame in a sec. I'm just trying to get the shapes down. Without smudging too much. I'm just trying to reproduce the same shapes I did here. Try to keep it as close as possible so it's a good example of mixed techniques for pretty much the same image. I go to my 2H. Just going to give me a softer application here. Sorry, off frame. If I ever do another one of these, I think I'll cut up the drawings onto 3 separate pieces of paper, so as I flip it, it's constantly in frame. Back to the HB. Don't want to use too soft of a pencil like a B or a 4B or anything like that, a 2B, because it's going to be really hard to keep the lead from blending with the paint in a minute. So you don't want to use too soft, but at the same time, it makes it a little harder to get dark. Essentially using a cross-hatching technique instead of pressing harder to just get a darker value on paper. All right, so I like to use makeup brushes for this, cheap dollar store stuff. And I'm just blending the graphite, starting with the lightest area because I'm going to get graphite buildup on the brush. So it'll give me the most control this way. You see I'm losing most of that linear texture from the pencil lines. To give me a nice smooth edge. And I'm just going off frame and basically rubbing the brush on a piece of paper to try to get some of the graphite off of it. So I'm going to do the same thing here on the shoulder shadow. And just start from the center of the shadow and work my way out. Similar to what I did with the watercolor when I was going from dark to like blending the darks, blending the colors into the wet areas. So just start with the dark area. And blend it. I'm gonna do the darkest areas last because that's gonna give me a lot of graphite buildup in the brush. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna need to redraw the webbing in some areas, but it's fine because it's a lot easier to do in pencil than with a brush. Actually, prefer this flat brush to do this. There's still a bit of texture that's being left behind just because I'm working on watercolor paper, but it's okay. I'm not too concerned with it. All right, let's get into the darkest areas. Okay, let's see. What do I have that I can use for the glasses? It's this one, or the lenses. Almost done. I need to darken. I've got a piece of paper here because I'm going to smudge the hell out of this. I think I'd have a scrap piece of paper somewhere. Nope, that's not scrap. Just going to tape down a piece of paper over this guy to make sure I don't get smudging on it. There. Can't see it. Now, as you blend the graphite, it's going to become harder to apply additional layers because the surface is very smooth. So you just kind of have to gently just add another layer, blend it, add another layer, blend it. I'm not going to go crazy with it. There's no need, but the only thing I definitely need to do is redraw my webbing because it's lost. All right. All right. So we got the graphite rendition done. So now the next step is going to be pretty much the same as the first step on the watercolor on the normal watercolor one, and that is to cover it in water. But now, more importantly, on this one, the water is going to help seal in the graphite, and this is a bit of a tricky approach because graphite is so fluid; they could very easily smudge. So I'm going to use the biggest brush I can find that I have here to try to do it all, to just soak it in one pass. Hopefully it works out. Let me see what I have here in terms of large brushes. I know I have a 1 inch somewhere. It's possible I destroyed it already. No, there it is. So there's a 1 inch brush. I should be able to just do 2 strokes and that's it. But before I do that, I'm going to clean up some of the smudging around the edge. These Tough Stuff erasers are fantastic. They're cheap and really good for erasing pencil. Try not to smudge with my fingers. Defeats the purpose. All right. So I have a thing of fresh water here. I'm going to soak my brush. And hope I can do this. There. Okay. No smudging. Very soft application. Lots of water. So like I said, the purpose of this water pass is to seal the graphite in. Shouldn't have any weird specks because they will dry into the paper. You could spray a workable fixative. That's definitely going to work better, but it's going to make it a little bit harder for the paint to adhere to the paper. So I'm going to let this naturally dry for a few minutes before I hit it with the blow dryer. And the reason I do that, if in case there's any water pooling, when I hit it with the blow dryer, it's going to smear. So we don't want that. So yeah, I'm just going to let this dry for, let's see if I can put a little bit more water on it. Let it dry for a couple of minutes, and I'm going to hit it with the blow dryer. So yeah, I'll be back. All right, so now that this is pretty much dry, it'll still smudge a little bit, but it's good enough. So because all the values are already down here, it's kind of working backwards at this point. So instead of starting off with a red wash, I'm going to start off with the darks, which was uh, purple. This is obviously a faster process, so this should be easier. Well, but it is a different look. So I'm just mixing my purple here. Because a lot of the values are already defined in pencil, I don't need to be too accurate with this, right? So you see it's kind of looser brush strokes. And I'm just using the flat shader. Don't do that. And soften them a little bit by wetting the edge of the shadow. This in a way similar to painting digitally, or one way of painting digitally, um, or I think even using Copics, where you block in your shadows first. Actually, very similar to the way I do a lot of my acrylic work is when I do tonal on the painting, like a grisaille in gray, or a darker color, and then glaze the final color on top. Okay, there's the shadow. Did use a little bit of an orange for the highlights. So I'm going to do the yellow highlight area. So I'm adding a touch of yellow first. Just going with a bit of water to soften the edges. I'm just going to hit it with the blow dry, make sure that's nice and dry. And now I'm just going to hit it with red. But I'm not going to do a soft red. Still want some transparency. Hopefully this isn't bleeding through. Soaked brush, and I'm going to work from the edges inward. I didn't wet the surface, which I probably should have a little bit. See the yellow showing through, the purple showing through, the graphite showing through. It's everything's just already there. Don't want to overwork an area because it's going to start picking up the paint like I'm doing here. So we'll let that dry. And while that's doing its thing, where's my number one brush? Where is it? Okay. I'm going to work on the mask a little bit. So again, working backwards instead of working with the light wash. I'm going to start off with the darkest blue. Just gonna touch up these shadows a bit. I overworked them, so scraped a bit of the paint. All right, let that dry a bit. I'm just going to do the webbing. Same thing as I did before. I think I used kind of a neutral black or normal blue mixed with black. Ooh. A little simpler because the lines are really noticeable, so I can just tracing them over. Okay, got webbing. See if I can darken some spots on the mask a little more. before we hit it with blue. Still no black being used at any point. It's just the gray of the graphite is what's showing through. All right, so I think this is pretty. Let me hit it with the blow dryer just to be on the safe side. A sec. Okay, go back with the red. I'm gonna do another cover of red to make the color pop more. Try to keep it as even as possible. You know what? What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually wet it to make sure I get nice even coverage. Kevin, I don't know if you're still watching, but I think this is very similar to what the MM18s I did were like. And while it's wet, I'm going to throw a little bit of purple in there towards the shadow areas. Just hit it with red again. Because of the gray undertone, it's going to be very hard to get a really rich saturated color. But if that's what you're going for, then you wouldn't use the gray, you do this approach. Watercolor being a transparent medium, it's going to actually take the chroma of and the values of whatever's underneath, and it's going to show through. Okay, I'm just going to throw a touch of that orange down the center, same way as we had on the other one. I got a little sloppy with the edge there, unfortunately. Okay, so that's pretty much done. I'm just going to add the blue to the glasses. Where's my one brush again? Keeps on running away from me. There it is. So I'm just painting over the frame of the glasses or the goggles in blue. It's going to get rid of all the whites and going to make them get a little bit more unified. I'd like to take this moment to remind everyone to like and subscribe and share and comment. Thank you, Billy. Got that engraved in my head. So there we go. We've got two versions down. Really color heavy one, very saturated. The softer one, where I can see that actually I messed up the lens. Let's see if I can fix it. It's great having them side by side because it's easy to compare. This needs to be shaped more like that. Typically, this one took half the time of this one, but the color's not as rich and could build up values and more saturation and color shifts similar to this, but kind of defeats the purpose because it's going to end up taking longer. All right, so now for the last piece, and this is going to be the simplest one. This is more of the comic book style. So in this one, we're definitely going to be using black. So I have a 0.1 micron that I'm going to use to draw in the core shape. So I'm not going to draw in the shadows because we don't want that. But I'm definitely going to do the outline of the goggles. And the webbing. Just trying to keep. All right, let's do the webbing. All right, neck webbing. Oops. So I went off frame with the webbing. So now I'm going to use the 003 to block in some of the darks. I think it's called spotting the blacks. Let's block in my main shadows that I'm going to want to keep really dark. Well, in this case, they're going to be black. It's almost dead, so let's go back to the 0.1. Whereas I'm going to go with a slightly thicker one. In this case, I think that this is a 0.5. Nope. Where's a 0.5? I know I have one somewhere. There we go. Just blacking out the darkest areas. It doesn't really matter what marker you're using or felt tip pen or whatever you're using, as long as it's waterproof, because we're going to wet this in a minute. And if this isn't waterproof, it's going to bleed all over the place. Okay, so for this area, I'm not going to try to shade it with a pen because it's just going to take forever. I'm going to use what is this? Pentel brush pen, and just go hit it with straight black. That's definitely going to need a minute to dry. The India ink takes a bit to dry, so I'm just going to hit it with the blow dryer. Okay, so it's there. So for this approach, we're going to be using black. And essentially what we're going to be doing is very similar to the graphite. We're going to create all the tones, but we're going to create them all with black. So just using black, and you can do this with ink as well, but because we're using watercolor today, I'm going to do it with black watercolors. I hope that's dry. Just going to create the tones. Now, the only reason I covered that in red, on a faded red, was to seal in the pencils. It's really the only reason there. But it's a similar approach because as the first one, but instead of working in the reds, I'm working with the blacks, and this is a very soft black at this point. just creating the base shapes. Softening the edges is needed. And we'll do a couple of layers. Just gradually do another wash. So much for a mini tutorial. 3 hours later. I'm gonna do that shadow under the mask. So in this case for the mask, I'm not really going to use too much blue, just using different values of black to give me dark grays. Let's just blend them a little bit. I'm just building up those black values, those grays blending into the darkest areas. This shouldn't have been black, but whatever. I have to adjust a little bit. So, do a special shout out to the Twitch spam bot. I'm just gonna get. Apparently, I can't delete that comment. So, bite me. I'm already famous. Because I'm using black here, gives me the flexibility to get really defined with the tonal range. You could actually use this approach and do the exact same thing I'm doing here, but just do the build up and the base color, which is very similar to what we did on the first one. But that was working light to dark versus this building value, building form approach. And there's no right or wrong between these techniques, it's just different looks and different ways to achieve different looks. So I use all three techniques depending on how I feel and what I'm trying to do when I do something. Though for my workflow, this approach works best for acrylics. Maybe next week I'll do one of these in acrylic. But I think by next week I'm be seriously behind the schedule, what I'm actually supposed to be working on. So maybe not. All right, so I'm going to hit it with the blow dryer now. Let this dry. Good enough. All right, so back to red. So at this point, just going to cover this in red. The darks are going to be darker. The areas that are not covered in ink or in paint are going to be red. But because I did use pure black, I can go a lot darker. Sorry, a lot more saturated with the paint. So as long as I'm careful, I should be able to do this in maybe one pass. By pass, I mean just one total uh, layer of paint over the whole thing. All Okay, gonna hit it with the blow dryer. Very important that it's dry, otherwise, start peeling paint like I did a little bit here. Be able to fix that on this pass. So, like I mentioned, this is the closest approach to the way I handle acrylics. Um, and this is actually looking very similar to the way Spider-Man would look like if I did him in acrylic. The only difference, and the reason I prefer acrylics, is that you can always go lighter with acrylic because acrylic's not transparent. I can just go red, then go purple, then go white, then go yellow. It doesn't matter. You can just constantly paint over. Watercolor is not as forgiving, but you can see very easy to achieve that look. I think for overall ease, this is probably the easiest approach, easiest way to do things. But it's not for everyone, and you could use softer colors instead of black for the shadow. So you could go with dark purple or dark blue to do what I did in the black. Um, but it's not the same. And on the watercolor side, it's gonna because the paint's transparent, it's gonna take the paint's gonna get tinted. So you can see the black here is actually getting a nice red tint, which is perfect. But if that was blue or purple, get a warmish feel. It'll be a different color. I still need to do the goggles. Where's my number 1 brush? Try to use the same blue as I did on the other ones, but on this one, I'm actually going to go in with the white gouache in a bit. I'm just going to go with the white to pick up the highlights. Just hit it with blow dryer. Get some of the reds aren't even. It's hard to see on camera, but there's a couple of spots that I want to go over again. Okay, let's get my red back. Touch up some of these areas. Okay, and I do want to add a touch of yellow to match the rest of them. Because it's going over a darker red, it's going to be more orangey than yellow. But it's enough of a hue shift to add some volume. But this is where coming in with the white in a minute is going to make a big difference. All right, so my white gouache, I'm gonna put a little drop. I hope this is gouache. I believe. And you can sort of see here, kind of getting a pink, but because there's white in it, it's going to become opaque. I'm going to do some, where do I have the highlights? It's very subtle right now, extremely subtle. But as I do each layer, I just add a little bit more white to my mixture. It is still very wet because I want to be able to get a smooth blend. So probably not going to go pure white on the red because there's no point, but I go very light pink. If I want to get really fancy, what I'm going to do is add a little, sure that I can get a nice edge, add a highlight to the webbing. Oh, sorry, I'm off frame. I'm just going to add some, make sure I don't have red mixed in here. create a very light blue, but just by mixing the white with my blue. You can see right here what that's going to look like. And add a couple of highlights. Brush is not wet enough. There we go. Personally, I think adding the white adds a lot more depth, but it is a different look. Right? It's adding some reflective light. And one thing I like to do when, well, for two reasons. One is when I don't have clean edges, like here, we're going to bled out. And also a lot of times when I do contour drawings, I like to add a thicker black outline to the silhouette, and it makes it look like a sticker. And it also helps define the edges a little bit better. And for extra points, it cleans up the edges when there's paint bleed. I did this on a lot of the anime sketches, just to make them look like stickers. I don't think too many people like that, but whatever. It is what it is. Okay, so that is my quick tutorial on 3 different ways to paint Spider-Man, 3 different techniques, different looks. Personally, I like this look. Could probably work this more to get more value. It's more natural, but this is simpler, faster, and higher impact because you get stronger color. This is cool as well, but I figure if you're gonna go this route, you might as well go this way. And even if you don't like to do the tones in pencil, or you can't get the tones dark enough in pencil, you can always use a pencil crayon, like a black pencil. You might need to seal the drawing because it's hard to get water under the wax pencils. I mean, you can't draw, you can't do watercolor over a wax pencil. It's never going to stick. But it's a way to do it. And I mean, really looking at this one, all it's really lacking is some contrast. You could always go in and do it with black paint, or if you want to bring up the contrast using, I think this is a black pencil, you can go in and try to pick up some of the blacks. It's not going to be the same look, but it's an option, right? Anyways, fundamentally, they're the same. They're the same approach. You know what? Sorry. While I'm saying that, the same approach, I'm going to add a touch of yellow to this. There we go. Hopefully the white's dry enough that I'm not going to. And of course, that's gouache, so it's reactivating it. Okay. Let's not touch that anymore so I don't ruin it. Oh, I see what I did miss up. Sorry. I did miss the blue tint on the eyes on this one. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, 3 different Spider-Man. Let me see if I can zoom out to see all 3 of them. Adjust the focus here. There we go. There we go. Yep, 3 different ways to do Spider-Man. Watercolor. Different looks, different feels. Hope this was useful to someone. If it was, let me know. If you have a preference in style, let me know. If you have one that you really don't like, also let me know. But that's it for me. 3 hours and 40 minutes. I think it's long enough. And we'll see you next time. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.